Hello everyone! In this devlog, I'll talk about the changes I've made to my game as part of Q2 of 2023. First, a quick note. It's well past the end of the quarter and I've completed most of the changes I wanted and I've released the game on itch.io. I had some real life things going on at the end of June which caused me to release the game later than I'd planned, and also for this video to not be made until now. At the start of the quarter, I wrote a big list of all the things I wanted to get done. I got most but not all of them done, and I think the game's in pretty good shape. The three biggest things I added were a new character model, a new physical game world, and modifications to the mob AI. At the beginning of the quarter, I was using a model I called Del, and I swapped it with a model I call Roxanne. I like the appearance of this model better, and stylistically it fits better with the rest of the world. In addition to getting all the animations retargeted and working, I added the weapon equipping animation and the potion drinking animation. They're both set in the animation blueprint such that they impact the spine and up, so the player can continue walking while drinking or unsheathing their sword, and the animations will blend correctly. I made a new landscape in Gaia, and I think it came out pretty well. I created a fairly simple auto landscape material which gave the landscape a lower swampy region and a middle grassy region with rock texture on the slopes. I added a few foliage spawners so swamp models spawn at a certain height, then forest models spawn at a slightly higher height with some overlap. The game was initially built using the pond sensing component, which is an older AI component and has a limitation I didn't like. I wanted the ability for mobs to sense enemies from a wider range than 90 degrees, which I didn't see that the pond sensing component allowed. I had an idea for making it better, so I removed that component and rolled my own sight sense. I won't get too technical, but it has to do with adding a couple of angles the user can set in each enemy's blueprint to determine what their range of sight is, coupled with a sphere with overlap events. It was interesting to create my own system, but I should have used the AI perception component sight sense instead. I kept my own sight sense, but also added the AI perception component's hearing sense. I added notifies to my character sprinting and jumping animations so they report noise, and now when the enemy hears noise, they enter a new alerting state and go to the location they heard the noise. This will cause them to follow the player around if the player remains in their alerting radius, and also based on the amount of noise the player is making. The enemy leaves the alerting state and goes back to patrolling if they hear no new noise for a few seconds. The enemy also goes into the alerting state when they exit the combat state rather than going directly back into the patrolling state. As for smaller changes, I've switched from using a single standing idle animation and a single running animation to using a blend space with idle, walk, and run animations so it looks better when the character is moving slowly. I've also fixed an issue where the character couldn't jump while sprinting. I added a day-night cycle and spent some time understanding the lighting settings so I have a night that is simultaneously night-looking and also light enough that the player can move around and see things. There's now music. Although I initially set up a situation where there was different music during the day versus the night, I think that the day-night cycle and different weather, including clouds and particle effects, and different music and ambiances depending on the weather, time of day, location of player, is a larger concept, and I would need to spend more time building and choosing the best way to set up such a complex and global system. I've added an actual pickaxe model that appears when the player gathers ore and disappears when the animation completes. There's a sound effect and a particle effect when you level up. I've added several 3D objects that didn't previously exist, including an ore model, and I've added several icons so that different objects look different from each other in the player's inventory. These icons were created by importing the 3D mesh and associated textures from Unreal into Blender and rendering a PNG. I fixed the merchant class so it displays all of the items the merchant will buy from the player, but only if the player has them in their inventory. There are a bunch of edge cases here. In the case that the player can purchase an item that the player can also sell to the merchant, does incrementing and decrementing work correctly as the player buys and sells the item? And if the player sells all of the item to the merchant, then purchases it again, does it reappear appropriately in the sell list? Lots of little things like that. All the menus are styled in a more professional design. I'm no good at UI or 3D or anything artsy really, so I purchased a pack that I thought would look nice and give a good look and feel. I created a path through the swamp and forest using these crystals, and I hope the point gets across that the user should follow these to get to the final boss and complete the intro quest. Along the path, I placed a few buildings which are packed level actors and which have enemies and I've placed down enemy spawners in various places as well as building out actual places for enemies to congregate. In those buildings and at those enemy congregation points, I placed containers which spawn a semi-random amount of certain chosen items, and here in the background you can see me writing the functionality for that. I placed a series of landscape resource nodes and placed down the merchant and his building. I think in the previous video I showed enemies fighting each other. That behavior can be accomplished by adding tags to the enemies and making the tag text different. So an enemy with a tag that says Group 1 will fight any enemy that both has a tag and the tag is not equal to the text Group 1. But unfortunately, enemies killing each other messed up the player's quest progress. See, the events reporting system does not differentiate between mobs who were killed by the player and mobs who were killed by other mobs. So if any two mobs died, no matter who did it, the quest would be advanced, and that was a bit weird. Although I like the enemies fighting each other behavior, it just didn't work in this case. Yes, I could have fixed the code and passed information to the event system about the killer, but I chose not to spend the time. Finally, I had a series of last-minute fixes. I updated the character to slowly regenerate health over time. I fixed a bug with the AI perception hearing sense. I fixed a bug with my sounds. They were not being attenuated properly, and I noticed, before I changed enemies fighting each other, that I could hear footsteps and fighting noises from an entire valley away. Not a great experience. I switched up the interaction system, so when a user hovers over an interactable actor, like an item, a landscape resource, a container, or a merchant, information appears about that actor, showing that it is interactable and how the player can interact with it. Along the same vein, when the user opens their inventory, they now see text telling them how to interact with their inventory items. When they're under attack, information appears about the fighting-based actions they can take. So that's it for this project. I'm not planning to make any updates to this unless there are serious bugs I can fix relatively quickly. Thanks for watching.